I used to think Willow Creek was the perfect place to start fresh. Friendly neighbors, quiet streets, and a sense of safety. But everything changed the day I discovered that Linda Prescott, our HOA president, had hired a fake police force, complete with K-9 units, to intimidate residents. I knew I had to act fast before someone got hurt. What I didn't expect was that my father, Chief Robert Carter, would uncover a web of corruption that would shake our entire community to its core. What would you do if the people claiming to protect your neighborhood were actually criminals with badges? Welcome to my channel. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I was exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital when I saw it. A bright orange notice fluttering on my front door. My only plan for the evening was to surprise Emily by helping her with the vegetable garden she had worked so hard on. But as I read the bold black letters across the top, my heart sank. Immediate action required. My hands trembled as I read further. I had heard rumors about Linda Prescott from my neighbors. She had moved in 6 months ago and somehow secured the HOA presidency within a few weeks. Now, standing in front of my door, I could already tell what kind of person she was. The way she pressed the pen so hard against the violation notice that it nearly tore through the paper told me everything. Unauthorized landscaping modifications detected in backyard. Immediate removal required. At the bottom of the notice, Linda's dramatic, oversized signature sprawled across the page like she was signing a royal decree. But it was the final line that made my stomach turn. Security will conduct regular inspections to ensure compliance. Security? Since when did our peaceful suburban neighborhood need security patrols for vegetable gardens? Emily and I had moved into 3789 Oakwood Lane just 3 months ago, drawn in by the welcoming atmosphere. I still remembered Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, bringing over homemade cookies the day we arrived. Now, standing on our porch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of both sides of the notice. Something about the wording felt off, like it was trying too hard to sound official. My father had always taught me one thing about dealing with authority, real or fake. Document everything. Inside, I found Emily humming in the kitchen, her hands still covered in soil from planting that afternoon. Her smile faded when I handed her the notice. "But we checked the HOA guidelines," she said, quickly pulling up the community website on her tablet. She scrolled through the regulations, highlighting Article 7. Vegetable gardens are permitted in backyard spaces with proper drainage. "We did everything right," Emily muttered, her voice firm. "Proper drainage, neat rows, approved height for raised beds. We followed every rule." Then, before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw her. Linda Prescott herself, dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, a tablet clutched in her manicured hands like a weapon. She stood on our welcome mat, tapping her foot impatiently. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a garden. Something much bigger was happening here. And that bright orange notice was only the beginning. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Linda Prescott didn't bother with pleasantries. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, though her eyes were already scanning past me, trying to see inside my house. "I wanted to make sure you received my notice," she said, holding her tablet like a police officer about to issue a citation. "I did," I replied evenly, keeping my expression neutral. "But I'd like to see the complaints you mentioned. And could you clarify which specific HOA guideline we violated?" Her smile thinned. "The board has received concerns about your agricultural activities." Emily appeared beside me, her tablet still open to the HOA website. "We reviewed the guidelines," she said, her voice polite but firm. "Backyard vegetable gardens are allowed. We followed every rule." Linda's grip on her tablet tightened. "Our new security team will be documenting all violations starting tomorrow. I suggest you comply quickly to avoid complications." Then she turned and strode away, but not before I noticed something odd. The case on her tablet. It had a logo that looked suspiciously like a police badge. I closed the door, my mind racing. Emily was already at the kitchen table, pulling up the most recent HOA board meeting minutes. "Jake," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "They never voted on hiring a security team." I leaned in, scanning the document. No discussions, no proposals, no budget allocations. "Then where is she getting the authority for this?" I asked, more to myself than to Emily. We both turned to look outside. Linda was still walking down the street, stopping in front of other houses. Every few steps, she snapped a photo with her tablet. When she reached the Martinez house, she paused, typing something furiously. I suddenly remembered their complaint about noise regulations at the last HOA meeting, how they had questioned the new late-night curfew rules Linda had introduced. Then she stopped again, this time in front of the Nguyen's yard, where their small garden was filled with fresh herbs. Emily's hand clenched into a fist. "She's targeting people," she muttered. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. This wasn't about enforcing HOA rules. This was about control. And I had a feeling we were just getting started. The next morning, I was drinking my coffee when I saw them. Two men in black polo shirts with HOA security printed on the back stood in my backyard, taking photos of our vegetable garden. I set my mug down slowly. These weren't regular HOA inspectors. Their movements were too deliberate, too aggressive. And then I saw the tactical belts. One of them had a holstered taser. The other had handcuffs strapped to his belt, real ones, not the cheap plastic kind security guards usually carry. I felt my pulse quicken. Emily was still upstairs when I stepped onto the back porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. The taller one turned toward me, his hand resting on the taser. "We have police authority within this community," he said, flashing a badge that disappeared too quickly for me to read. "We're documenting ongoing violations under HOA Code 39A. He spoke with the confidence of someone who wasn't used to being questioned. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Both men shifted uncomfortably. "I'd like to see your credentials," I said, "and documentation of this police authority you're claiming." The shorter one took a step forward, his shoulders squared like he was ready for a fight. But before he could speak, Linda Prescott appeared. She strode across my lawn in designer workout gear, a fresh violation notice in hand. "These officers don't answer to residents," she announced, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "They report directly to the HOA Executive Board, which means they report to me." I clenched my jaw. I wasn't the only one watching. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson peeked through her curtains. When our eyes met, she quickly ducked away. But not before I saw the fear on her face. That look made my stomach sink. Something was happening here. Something bigger than just a few unfair violations. Later that morning, I reviewed the footage from my phone. The officers had no name tags. Their badges didn't match any local law enforcement design I'd ever seen. And the equipment on their belts? It looked real, but something about the way they wore it was off, like they weren't trained to use it properly. I spent my lunch break researching private security regulations in our state. Every legitimate company needed licenses and permits, especially if they were carrying weapons. But when I checked the HOA records, there was no mention of any approved security contracts. Nothing. Emily came downstairs as I was emailing the state licensing board. "Why are there men with tasers taking pictures of our tomatoes?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I showed her the footage. Her face went pale. "Jake, those aren't regular security guards." She swallowed hard. "I used to work for a security company, remember? Their gear is all wrong." We both turned to look out the window. The so-called officers were still moving house to house, taking photos of certain homes, ones that had spoken up at HOA meetings. The Martinez family, the Nguyen's, the Wallaces, who had questioned the new security fees. I created a private group chat with trusted neighbors and sent them the footage. Messages started pouring in. They entered my backyard without permission. They took photos of my kids playing. They threatened to fine me for washing my car. Then, just as I was compiling the evidence, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda Prescott. Your continued surveillance of our security team is a violation of HOA policy. Expect enforcement action tomorrow. A chill ran down my spine. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. But in her attempt to intimidate me, Linda had made a crucial mistake. She had just confirmed what I suspected all along. These men weren't real police officers, and I was going to prove it. My phone buzzed during a critical work meeting. Emily. She never called during work hours. I stepped out, my stomach twisting as I answered. Jake, she whispered, her voice shaking. They're in our backyard. My blood ran cold. Who? 3 of them. The fake security guys. They jumped the fence while I was picking tomatoes. In the background, I could hear deep male voices, loud, commanding. Then, the sound of heavy boots on our wooden deck. Ma'am, this is your final warning, a voice barked. Exit the garden now. Something in the way he spoke sent alarm bells ringing in my head. He was trying too hard to sound official. We have authorization to remove you by force. Emily's breath hitched. I'm not leaving my own property, she said firmly. Show me your police badges or leave now. The line crackled. Then I heard something that made my heart slam against my ribs. Unit 2. Subject is non-compliant. Requesting K-9 backup at 3789 Oakwood Lane. They were calling in a dog for a vegetable garden dispute. I was already running to my car. Emily, don't move. Call 911 right now. These aren't real cops. Through the speaker, I heard another voice. Linda Prescott. Mrs. Carter, your garden is a direct violation of HOA Aesthetic Guidelines, Section 4.3. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I swerved onto our street. Emily's voice cut through, sharp and incredulous. I live here, and those tomato plants are in our backyard. Then, in the background, a low, menacing growl. A dog. I could hear the clatter of boots on gravel, the creak of our garden gate opening. Look what I found, one of the men said. Non-approved vegetation, peppers, I think. Those are jalapenos, Emily snapped. Since when do vegetables have ethnic restrictions? Linda's voice turned icy. This is what happens when you ignore warnings. First, the unapproved plants. Then unauthorized garden stakes. And now, resisting HOA security? I swerved into our driveway just as the fake security team surrounded Emily near our front steps. 3 men in tactical gear stood in a half circle, blocking her path. Linda stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, furiously scribbling. But my eyes locked onto something else. A German shepherd, straining at its leash, teeth bared, ready to lunge. The young handler gripping the leash looked barely old enough to drink. He was struggling to keep the dog under control. These weren't just rent-a-cops playing dress-up anymore. This was dangerous. I barely had time to throw my car into park before one of the security guys stepped toward me. Sir, stay in your vehicle. I ignored him and got out, pulling out my phone. Linda, step away from my wife. Linda turned, her smirk unwavering. Ah, perfect timing. Your wife has been interfering with official HOA security operations. We have documented 17 violations, including aggressive behavior toward our officers. I started recording. Funny, I said. Nowhere in the HOA bylaws does it mention a private police force or K-9 units. The youngest officer shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping from his belt. Emily caught my eye and gave a slight nod. She was recording too. We had talked about this after the first time these guys showed up. The cameras on our house were rolling from 3 different angles. Linda's mistake? She brought backup. But she didn't realize. So did I. In the distance, a sound cut through the tension like a knife. Sirens. Not coming from the HOA office. From the real police station. Linda didn't seem to notice at first, too busy waving her clipboard. But Captain Frank Miller, the supposed head of her security team, did. His eyes darted to the street. His fingers twitched at his side. His men weren't ready for this. The dog handler's grip tightened on the leash. His knuckles turned white. I turned to him, calm but firm. By the way, I said, nodding toward the dog's vest. "What's your certification number for handling that police K-9? The kid froze. The dog, picking up on his anxiety, started whining. Linda was still rambling when the first patrol car rounded the corner, lights flashing. Then another, and another. The entire block lit up in red and blue. And stepping out of the lid car was my father, Chief Robert Carter. I had never seen Linda's face go pale so fast. The security team tried to back away, but it was too late. Real police officers had already formed a perimeter. The German Shepherd, sensing the shift in power, lay down on the pavement, tail wagging, completely unbothered by the real K-9 officers now approaching. My father's voice carried across the lawn, steady, authoritative. "Linda Prescott," he said, his badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Would you care to explain why you have unauthorized personnel impersonating law enforcement officers on private property?" Linda's face flickered through 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, fear, anger, panic. She turned to Captain Miller, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the real police badges. 2 officers approached him. "Sir," one said, "that's department-issued gear you're wearing. Mind telling me where you got it?" The so-called HOA security force started shifting nervously. One of them reached for his earpiece, as if expecting orders. Linda looked at me, then at my father, then back at me. I saw the exact moment it clicked in her head. She had just picked a fight with the wrong family. By the time the last of the fake officers were in handcuffs, our quiet neighborhood was a crime scene. Real police officers swarmed the area, collecting statements, taking photos, and gathering evidence. Neighbors, many of whom had been too scared to speak out before, stepped out of their homes, phones in hand, recording everything. The HOA's so-called security team had gone too far, and now everyone knew it. 2 hours later, I sat in my father's office at Lakewood Police Department, reviewing everything we had uncovered so far. Across his desk were stacks of financial records, HOA meeting minutes, and surveillance photos. Photos of our neighbors, their homes, their children. I felt my stomach turn as I flipped through them. Some of the images were time-stamped at 2 or 3 a.m. These guys weren't just enforcing bogus HOA violations. They had been watching us, for months. Dad slid a document toward me. "This goes deeper than we thought," he said grimly. It was a bank statement. Payments from the HOA to a company called Community Enforcement Solutions. The amount? $98,500 a month. Way more than what our HOA was budgeted for security. Emily, sitting beside me, took the paper and scanned it quickly. "That's nearly $600,000 in just 6 months, she muttered. "Where is that money coming from?" We didn't have to look far for the answer. Linda Prescott had been charging special enforcement fees to homeowners who received violations. The Martinez family? They had paid $2,750 in security deposits after being written up for a noise complaint. The Nguyen's? Fined for unauthorized landscaping. The same excuse Linda had used for our vegetable garden. The more we dug, the worse it got. Detective Lisa Mitchell, one of my father's best investigators, burst into the office holding a stack of papers. "Chief, we found their training manual." She dropped it on the desk. Emily and I leaned in as Dad flipped through the pages. It wasn't a security manual. It was a playbook for intimidation. There were detailed instructions on how to target specific residents who were outspoken at HOA meetings. Issue warnings and fines to create a pattern of violations. Use K-9 units as an intimidation tactic. In the margins, handwritten notes from Linda Prescott. One stood out immediately. Keep pressure on families with children. Remind them HOA has authority to report to CPS if necessary. I felt a cold wave of rage wash over me. She had been threatening people's kids. Emily clenched her fists. "This was never about HOA rules," she said through gritted teeth. "It was about power." As we pieced together the financials, one thing became crystal clear. Linda hadn't just created a fake police force. She had built an extortion ring inside our own neighborhood, and she wasn't working alone. The fake security captain, Rick Dawson, wasn't just some rent-a-cop. He had been fired from 2 different police departments for excessive force and misconduct. The dog handler had no certification. The German Shepherd wasn't even a trained police K-9. It was Rick Dawson's personal pet. Linda had hired disgraced ex-cops and unlicensed security contractors, given them fake badges, and let them terrorize an entire community, all while funneling HOA funds into her own pockets. Emily was still scrolling through old HOA emails when her breath caught. "Jake, look at this." She turned her laptop toward me. It was an email from Linda to the HOA board, dated 2 months ago. Phase 2 of security implementation will include interior surveillance to ensure compliance with community guidelines. My eyes widened. Interior surveillance. She wasn't just planning to monitor people's yards. She was preparing to put cameras inside their homes. Dad let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind he took when he was furious but holding it in. "This isn't just an HOA scam anymore," he said. "This is a civil rights violation." Emily shuddered. She was turning our neighborhood into a police state. I exhaled, trying to process just how far this had gone. And then, Dad's phone rang. I didn't hear what was said on the other end, but when he hung up, his expression was darker than I'd ever seen it. That was the FBI. He looked at us. "Linda Prescott has been running this operation in multiple states." I stared at him. Emily's jaw dropped. This wasn't just about our community anymore. We had uncovered something much bigger. Faroban Danai, 6, Fen 6. Sudan Ket Kwakongdong, and Susupdo Huantuan Kubarbra. 950 to ChatGPT Danai. Part 6. The Community Unites and Linda Prescott's Downfall. The morning after Linda's arrest, our neighborhood was buzzing. The once quiet streets of Willow Creek were now filled with residents standing in small groups, talking in hushed but excited voices. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before were now sharing their experiences, trading stories of harassment, threats, and fines. The truth was finally out. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't afraid anymore. At the Lakewood Police Department, my father held a community meeting in the largest conference room they had. It was standing room only. People packed in, some even standing in the hallway just to listen. Detectives had set up a projector, displaying documents, emails, and photos they had confiscated from Linda's security team. But nothing hit harder than the videos. One by one, residents shared Ring doorbell footage, security cam recordings, and cell phone clips of the fake officers in action. The Martinez family had footage of a fake officer threatening to call Child Protective Services on them because their kids were playing basketball in their own driveway. The Nguyen's had a video of a security guard measuring the height of their mailbox at 6 o'clock a.m., writing up a $500 violation for being too tall. The Wallaces had emails from Linda demanding an extra $200 in special security fees after they questioned an increase in HOA dues. As each story was told, the anger in the room grew. People shook their heads, whispered to each other. Some even wiped away tears. What had started as isolated incidents now formed a pattern of targeted harassment. And every single person in that room had been a victim. The biggest revelation came from the forensic accountant my father had assigned to the case. Standing at the front of the room, he flipped to a bank statement on the projector. "This is the HOA's official budget," he explained. "It allocates exactly $2,000 per month for security services." He clicked to the next slide. And this is what Linda was actually spending. The screen filled with numbers that made my stomach turn. $98,500 per month to Community Enforcement Solutions, the fake security company Linda had set up. Over $185,000 in violation fees collected from homeowners in the last 6 months. Thousands spent on personal expenses, including luxury vacations, spa treatments, and even a high-end espresso machine for her office. Murmurs of outrage filled the room. Someone near the front muttered, "We could have fixed the damn pool with that money." A woman in the back called out, "She's been robbing us blind." And she had. While we were being fined for mailbox heights and flower colors, Linda had been lining her pockets. But the worst part? She had done this before. As the meeting continued, detectives revealed that Linda Prescott had pulled the same scheme in at least 2 other communities. She would move in, gain control of the HOA, then create a security crisis that only her team could solve. She would funnel money into fake enforcement fees, harass homeowners into paying thousands in fines, and when people started asking questions, she disappeared. Every time, she left behind a trail of missing funds, frightened families, and a broken community. Not this time. This time she got caught. As the police wrapped up the meeting, people stayed behind, still processing everything. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman named Teresa Ramirez, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years, stood up and spoke. "We let this happen because we were afraid." Her voice shook with emotion. "We let her divide us. We let her make us suspicious of each other, and now we know we were never the problem." The room fell silent. People exchanged looks, some ashamed, some nodding in agreement. Then someone said, "We need to fix this." That night, a wave of messages flooded the neighborhood group chat. "No more fear. We need to take back our community. Let's vote for a new board." By the end of the night, a petition had been signed by over 90% of residents. Linda Prescott was officially removed from the HOA. The following week, we held a new election. This time, no secret meetings, no fake ballots. For the first time in years, people actually wanted to be involved. Emily and I arrived early to help set up. Tables filled with homemade cookies, coffee, and stacks of violation notices people had saved as proof of Linda's corruption. People laughed, shared stories, reconnected. Neighbors who had once only spoken to complain about HOA rules were now planning block parties and community cleanups. Then came the most important moment, the vote. It wasn't even close. For the first time in Willow Creek history, the HOA board was now made up of real residents, not power-hungry control freaks. And the very first thing they did? They abolished all the bogus regulations Linda had put in place. No more fines for basketball hoops. No more surprise inspections. And definitely no more fake police. As the sun set over the newly united Willow Creek, I stood on my porch, watching kids ride their bikes, parents chatting freely in their front yards. Emily stepped beside me, her hand resting on my arm. "Feels different, doesn't it?" she murmured. I nodded. For the first time in months, our neighborhood felt like home again. We had been bullied, manipulated, and taken advantage of. But in the end, we won. Not just against Linda Prescott, against fear. And as I watched a group of neighbors gather in front of our house, smiling, waving, truly at peace, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a community anymore. It was a family. 2 weeks later, moving trucks pulled up in front of Linda Prescott's house. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as she supervised the loading of her overpriced patio furniture and perfectly trimmed hedges, the same hedges she had fined other homeowners for not maintaining. Her usual smug expression was gone. She looked defeated, exposed. And as she climbed into the back seat of a waiting car, she didn't look at anyone. She didn't dare. The headline in the morning paper had said it all. HOA president pleads guilty in fake police scandal. Multi-state investigation uncovers fraud and harassment ring. Turns out, Linda had struck a deal. In exchange for naming her accomplices, she'd received a lesser sentence. But that didn't mean she was walking away free. She would never be allowed to run another HOA again. She was disgraced. Her little empire of fear? Gone. And now, for the first time in a long time, so was the shadow she had cast over our neighborhood. Willow Creek had changed. Where once there had been tension and suspicion, now there was laughter, connection, and community. The Martinez kids were back in their driveway playing basketball, no longer afraid of fake security guards measuring their hoop. The Nguyen's garden was thriving, filled with fresh herbs and vegetables. No one dared to question their unauthorized landscaping anymore. The Wallaces helped repaint the community playground, The one Linda had ignored while funneling HOA money into her own pockets. And our own backyard? Emily and I expanded the garden. Neighbors stopped by to trade tomatoes for cucumbers, peppers for homemade jam. Mrs. Henderson, who once feared opening her curtains, now volunteered to organize the community's first ever neighborhood picnic. People were talking to each other again, helping each other. Because the truth was, the strongest security system isn't a fake police force. It's neighbors looking out for one another. One evening, my father came by for dinner. He wasn't Chief Carter anymore. He had retired after cracking the case that took Linda Prescott down. Now, he was just Dad. As we ate on the porch, he sipped his coffee, looking out over our peaceful street. "You know what the best kind of justice is?" he asked. I shook my head. He smiled. "The kind that doesn't just take down the bad guys, but brings people together." I thought about everything we had been through, everything we had lost, and everything we had gained. He was right. This wasn't just about getting rid of Linda. It was about reclaiming what we had forgotten, what it really meant to be a community. If you've ever dealt with an HOA overstepping their power, you're not alone. These organizations exist to help homeowners, not to control them. If your HOA is engaging in shady practices, attend meetings, make your voice heard, review HOA bylaws, know your rights, document everything. Paper trails matter. Connect with your neighbors. There is power in numbers. And if you ever feel like something isn't right, trust your instincts. Because the moment we stopped being afraid, we took back our neighborhood. And you can too. Like, comment, and share your HOA horror stories below. And remember, the best security isn't a badge, it's standing together.